Hola, 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 mi gente. Estamos aquí. We are here at the Puerto Rican Day Parade, and I am here loud and proud to rank Zohran Mamdani #1 for mayor of New York City.
What New Yorkers are looking for is a mayor who will actually fight for them.
I have so much faith in him as a leader for our city to move us forward because we share in the same values.
New York City, my place of residence, is now on the cusp of probably the worst selection of choices in a Democratic primary of all time. And I want you guys to remember that at one point in time, Bill de Blasio was running against Anthony Weiner in the Democratic mayoral primary process. And that just goes to show you how bad the field is in this particular case. I mean, the least bad candidate, and I want you guys to understand that when I say the least bad candidate currently running in the Democratic primary is Governor Andrew Cuomo. Governor, I will kill your elderly relatives in a nursing home and cover it up. Andrew Cuomo is the least bad option. That's just to give you an idea of the absolute slate of monsters and communists that are running against him at this moment in time. But none is getting more attention than a man called Zohran Mamdani.
Furthermore, the name is Mamdani. M-A-M-D-A-N-I. You should learn how to say it because we got to get it right.
No, I will not learn how to say your name because hopefully you will never in the history of this great city own the title of mayor of New York City. Now, of course, we got to break down what is going on in the polling. What are Mamdani's actual chances of taking this particular office? But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
Now, like I alluded to in the open of this particular video, Andrew Cuomo is terrible. I hate Andrew Cuomo. I don't want him to be the mayor of New York City. But the fact is, when you have this slate of Democratic alternatives, you root for the least bad option because the person who wins the Democratic primary has an excellent chance at the general election. And that appears to be the facts of this particular year. Although we could get some twisty twists in that Eric Adams is running third party. He is likely to steal votes away from the Democrats, so who knows how this will all shake out eventually. That being said, Mamdani is clearly and obviously the worst. This guy's a member of the New York DSA, which is a radical, even further left organization than the New York City Democratic Party. He also pals around with all these different terrible people like Emma Vigeland, Cenk's nephew, and basically everybody that you can think of that is an insufferable, terrible progressive like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez happens to be behind this individual. And on top of everything else, you know 100% after he gets into office, if we are ever unfortunate enough for that to happen, he is going to pull a Sadiq Khan, where you run as this progressive, this absolute person who's not all that concerned with religion and whatnot, but then once you get into office, you start bitching and moaning about Islamophobia all over the place. This is the pattern that we see from these types of progressive candidates that also happen to be Muslim, even though they downplay their religious affiliation prior to getting into office, but as soon as they're there, that becomes the key component of their identity. Now, in terms of policy, Mamdani is as bad as it gets. There's a reason why all these wealthy progressives, all these nepotism brats are all behind this individual, and a huge portion of his base of support comes from wealthy Brooklynites and whatnot, and that's because these are all the people that have their parents paying for their rent, so of course they think because mommy and daddy takes care of everything for them, then daddy government should take care of everybody else's needs because that's what we need to do. And of course, he has the everything's free kind of platform, which includes him having government-run grocery stores in New York City, which we talked about before, that don't have to pay property tax and don't have to pay rent.
Grocery prices are out of control. The cost of eggs and milk has skyrocketed. Some stores are even using dynamic pricing, jacking up the cost over the course of a day depending on what they can get away with. It doesn't need to be this way. I'm Zohran Mamdani, and as mayor, I will create a network of city-owned grocery stores. It's like a public option for produce. We will redirect city funds from corporate supermarkets to city-owned grocery stores, whose mission is lower prices, not price gouging. These stores will operate without a profit motive or having to pay property taxes or rent, and will pass on those savings to you.
And I would just point out that New York City is a city known for all these different various little corner stores. There's all these private grocery stores that are across the city of New York. And in reality, what this would actually do is drive those places out of business and be a giant money sink for the New York City taxpayer. So you're going to create more people dependent on the government, and it's going to lead to disastrous results. But the free everything doesn't just stop there. He also is promising a rent freeze. Now, I have a lot to say about this stupid ass proposal. However, I also want to incorporate this clip from this Young Turks segment where, of course, the progressives over there decided to endorse Mamdani, because I think it's absolutely crucial that you hear the absolute dumbest argument about this rent freeze humanly possible, which of course is from this other guy who's not Cenk Uygur on the Young Turks.
The Times was misleading with their rent freeze. That is for people who live in rent stabilized apartments. And there are many, and many of them, that's the only way they can stay in the city. So to prevent them from being priced out, greedy developers and corporate landlords want to raise those rents. He's going to fight for them. This is the working people, the working class, or maybe in some cases the working poor in New York. It's the only way they can stay in the city. Yes, I love that policy. He also does support new housing and new affordable housing. So it's not just going to be, it's not going to prevent new people from coming in. It's going to help lower prices overall. I think it's a smart policy. So I do want to dispel that myth that the New York Times is pushing, likely at the behest of the Cuomo campaign.
So I want to make something clear to everybody out there in the audience. It is 100% true that the rent freeze that Mamdani is proposing only applies to rent-controlled and rent-stabilized units, and not all of the private units across New York City. That being said, the person who's lying about this is not the mainstream media. It's not the people who are against Mamdani. It's Mamdani himself. He is campaigning on the idea that Andrew Cuomo is going to raise your rent, but he's going to freeze your rent, not taking into account the fact that, of course, he is going to initiate a policy that only applies to rent-stabilized and rent-controlled tenants. Also, in addition to that, this Young Turks host, who knows nothing about the New York City rental market, believes that this is not going to have impact on the broader New York rental market.
He also does support new housing and new affordable housing. So it's not just going to be, it's not going to prevent new people from coming in. It's going to help lower prices overall. I think it's a smart policy.
Look, I know progressives are economically illiterate, and that's why he's getting behind Mamdani, because Mamdani represents that economic illiteracy. But a quick Google search would have told this absolute buffoon that 44% of the units in New York City that are available for rent are rent controlled or rent stabilized. So this has an impact on almost half of the rental market, not to mention the fact that rent control and rent stabilization programs raise prices for everyone else due to those same impacts. So of course, this guy knows absolutely nothing about the market and how stuff is built in New York City, and how this will disincentivize building in New York City, because when you want to build a big building with a certain amount of units, what you have to do is reserve some of those units for rent stabilization. Now, if Mamdani is saying that he's not going to allow you to raise the rent even by the meager 1.5% a year that is standard under the program, then that is going to disincentivize building, because you are going to have to reserve a larger portion of units in there that are going to be economically unviable much more quickly, because you can't even raise them by 1.5%, let alone the actual market rate. In addition to that, he talks about how, the poors are in these rent stabilized and rent controlled apartments, when in reality, that's not true. Again, some people who have low income will win some of the lotteries for some of those lower tier apartments. But the fact is, what actually happens with rent control and rent stabilization is that people hold these units for years, pass them to relatives. And what ends up happening is typically the more wealthy people end up with those apartments in their hands, while broke people have to compete in the private market, which of course only represents around half of the available units. And because because of all the distortions and the increased demand for those private units, the rents end up skyrocketing over there. So it definitely impacts everything in the market. We saw in Buenos Aires when they ended up taking all these rules and regulations out of the market, that supply went up by, I believe, threefold and rents got cut in half. And by the way, this is true in every single city that does not have rent control or rent stabilization. In fact, all of the cities that have these programs have the highest rents, have the most out of control rents, and have all the same other problems associated with these types of programs. I mean, you guys might have seen this viral video that was going around that was advocating for taxation against landlords that don't rent any of their buildings, that leave their building vacant. Let me play a clip for that right now for you guys.
All right, this building right here is the 8th of nearly 100,000 vacant apartments that are in New York City. This is 2nd Avenue, which is prime real estate, where the average 4-bedroom goes for $6,000. I'll show you another completely vacant building about 200 feet away. Now, why are all these buildings vacant? These apartments continue to sit vacant because of a law that was passed in 2019 called the Housing and Stability Tenant Protection Act. Very well intentioned, very poorly executed. Big picture, what the law did is when someone moves out of a rent stabilized apartment, let's say they want to move to Florida or they pass away, they eliminated the landlord's ability to raise the rent at a reasonable level. So now when someone moves out of a building, the landlord's like, it doesn't make economic sense to renovate the apartment, and they take the tax write-off and let that apartment sit vacant. Here's another completely vacant building. Look at that. That building's been vacant for over 5 years, so you can read all about it. So every single day, as these apartments are being moved out of and they are not being renovated, New York City becomes more and more unaffordable.
And these absolute idiots on the left are calling for taxation against these landlords who aren't renting those units. But in reality, isn't it weird that in the same video where you say you could rent apartment units for $6,000 a month, that these buildings are left unoccupied, like the landlords are trying to lose money on these properties? It doesn't really make sense. Well, the thing is, when you actually search these addresses, what you end up finding out is that these buildings were built before 1974, which means not only are they eligible for rent stabilization, but they're actually eligible for the more restrictive rent control. And this specific building that he shows on screen, there's actually New York Post news articles about how they're trying to repair the building, but the one tenant that lives there, that's lived there for decades, is refusing to leave. And the reason he's refusing to leave is because his rent is capped at $350. Again, this New York Post article is from the same exact building that is featured in this video that supposedly is not being put out on the market because of greedy capitalism, but in reality, it's not being put out on the market because you can't even maintain an apartment unit and all the things that a landlord has to do without losing money if the rent is capped at $350. So we have a bunch of different buildings in New York City that are completely economically unviable due to the very policies that these left-wing progressives advocate for, and that supply will reemerge on the market if we ever decide to repeal said policies. But Mamdani wants to go in the other direction. He doesn't even want to do these public-private partnerships anymore. He wants to do 100% publicly funded housing.
I've already told you about my commitment to freeze the rent for every single rent stabilized tenant. That covers about half of all New York City renters. But what about the other half? We need more housing, a lot more. As mayor, I'll build 200,000 new, permanently affordable, union-built, rent-stabilized homes over the next 10 years, tripling what we're currently set to build. Any 100% affordable project gets fast-tracked. No more pointless delays. We're going to unleash the public sector.
Now, if you're ignorant or just stupid, then this might sound like a great policy to you. You know, oh, the private developers, they're the ones making apartments so much more expensive in New York City. I mean, in Austin and all these other cities in Texas and Florida where they don't have rent control and they let builders build, rents actually are going down. They're dropping in those cities because, you know, supply is actually allowed to rise and meet demand. But in New York City, where 44% of the units are capped or controlled in some way by the city council, it's actually the greedy capitalists that are raising the rent. Well, in reality, it's not true. And when you actually try to engage in these public housing initiatives, one of the things that you find out, and by the way, this is well documented in Ezra Klein's book Abundance, which all these progressives are attacking because it's a left-winger advocating for allowing people to build things, what you discover is that the cost is astronomical as soon as a percentage of the money is government money, let alone when the whole thing is funded. And by the way, we need look no further than the city of Chicago for a perfect example of this. So you guys might be familiar with this headline, and if you're not familiar, I will explain this story to you because I think it's absolutely crucial for you to understand, especially if you're advocating for fully funded government housing units in order to address the affordability crisis. So Brandon Johnson, I believe last year, announced that his administration was going to spend $11 billion in order to build 10,000 affordable housing units. And by the way, these are apartments. Now, if you're not good at math, if it wasn't your best subject, you might not realize that that is a cost of $1.1 million per unit. And if you guys also aren't aware, the median home price in the city of Chicago, for a whole home, is actually $350,000. So Brandon Johnson, the progressive, the guy that's probably most similar to Mamdani, was bragging to the public that he was going to spend 3 times the median price for a home in the city of Chicago, a whole house, on apartment units that, again, could be as small as studio apartment units. This is the graft of affordable housing paid for by the taxpayer, because what we end up discovering is that when tax dollars are in play, you have all these different additional costs like union wage, like all these different environmental regulations, all these various reviews that just drive up the cost to usually double what it costs to build something in the private market. But in this particular case, it costs over 3 times the cost of the median home, which, by the way, isn't the price to build a home in the city of Chicago, which is just absurd. So Mamdani can make all these promises all he wants, but in reality, what's going to happen right here is that almost none of these properties are going to get built. They're going to be overspent, and we're never going to reach the amount of building that we need in order to actually meet the demand of New Yorkers. So, spoiler alert, rent go up under Mamdani. He also has this free bus program, which, by the way, on Twitter, I've actually decided that I want to endorse, because the negative downside effects of this particular program are too numerous to measure. So first and foremost, he says he's going to pay for this by taxing the millionaires. Go get the millionaires and the billionaires. And in reality, this is just going to drive them out of New York City, because you already have to pay a premium to live in New York City if you're wealthy. But in addition to that, he needs statewide approval in order to raise taxes in the way that he wants on these millionaires. So there's no way he's going to be able to get that as the mayor of New York City. In addition to that, the free buses program will actually move paying subway customers away from the subway onto the buses, because again, if you're poor, why would you pay $2.90 if you can get on a bus that's going to be slower, but it's going to be free, which will end up damaging the MTA in 2 different ways, which will again create a bigger shortfall in that agency, which again will require another bailout through more taxation. Like, I know it sounds so obvious to you guys when I explain how stupid these policies are and how they'll backfire and how they'll make the city worse, but the fact is, a huge portion of the voters are behind this guy, and he is consistently polling in second place behind Andrew Cuomo. Oh, and did I forget to mention, Mamdani is also a defund the police guy, somebody who believes that the police are wicked, and he's actually, without saying the words defund the police, running on the same campaign for mayor right now as we speak.
Are you for defunding the police? Are you for a serious reform that people can see on the ground?
I am in favor of defunding the police.
And this is why I hate the New York City mayoral election as it stands right now, because in reality, we just have terrible choices. If you guys will recall, Governor Andrew Cuomo is the guy who signed bail reform, less is more, and raised the age. Now, he did those things because Andrew Cuomo wanted to run for president, and those things were in vogue at the time, and he wanted to be somebody seen as the leader on that issue if he decided to run in the primary, which shows clearly and obviously that Cuomo has no principles, and he will sign things that he knows are bad into law in order to forward his political career. But Mamdani believes in all that stuff. He's a true believer. He believes in defunding the police, abolishing the prisons, fighting for the illegal aliens, giving them whatever welfare that they want. So the guy is an even more disaster, because all the bad things that Cuomo did that he doesn't believe in, Mamdani truly believes in and wants to extend that tenfold. And that's the position where we're at right now. Now, of course, I just want to point out for everybody out there in the audience that people are going to say that Mamdani is leading in one particular poll, one specific poll. And I just need to make this clear. that poll is funded by the Mamdani campaign. They are connected to them. It also has a bunch of sampling issues, and maybe the most crucial thing about that poll is that it does not actually factor in ranked choice voting, which is how New York changed their Democratic primary process for this mayoral election in order to incorporate that. So all the polls that do factor in ranked choice voting have Cuomo winning by at least 12 over Mamdani, but this one poll that was put out by his campaign basically in order to gain headlines is what everybody's focusing on to essentially artificially generate the hype surrounding him. Now, I will also be remiss if I don't point out that despite all of these different various attacks that I've laid out against Mamdani on why he'll be the worst candidate, a huge portion of the attacks that are against him are related to the nation of Israel. So Mamdani is obviously a radical socialist, a DSA member, and a radical Muslim. So he hates Israel. He wants that state to be wiped out. I think he's actually said that as mayor, he would try to arrest Israeli officials.
Now, to the question around Benjamin Netanyahu, I was asked what I would do after he had just been issued an arrest warrant by the International Court of Justice. My answer is the same whether we are speaking about Vladimir Putin or Netanyahu. I think that this should be a city in compliance with international law. And we have seen other countries across the world who are signatories to the ICC state that they would honor that same request, be it Canada or other countries in Europe. And their honoring of it meant that Netanyahu did not travel there.
Which is just wonderful for New York City. We're just going to go after foreign officials based on the ICC, which the United States is not a party to, and Israel's not a party to, because that's apparently the number one priority for this guy. And this is what's giving him a lot of heat, because New York has the largest Jewish population outside of Israel. But trust me, the Israeli stuff, that's all secondary. You know, New York City mayor is not a foreign policy position. I know Democrats think that as mayors, they need to be like the leaders out there in the world. We have all these Democrats going to Ghana and partying it up over there. But trust me, New York City should be about New York City. It should be about all these other policies. But you know what? If the Israeli thing is what's going to take Mamdani out for the mayoral consideration, I'll take it. I'll accept those consequences of foreign influence on our government if that happens to get rid of the absolutely terrible candidate, who, by the way, is probably connected to a bunch of different other foreign regimes that he is also working on behalf of. Now, that's all I really have for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. As per usual, if you like this video, show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the disaster that is the New York City mayoral election. Till next time.